What is Malifaux? Should you play Malifaux? If you are on the fence, this video is for you. And if you are kind of new to miniatures games and you're interested, then this video is especially for you. Roll that intro. Welcome to Corner Case. You're in the hobby corner. I'm your host, your weird Waldo, and your best friend, Deck. So some of this video is for people who are newer to miniatures games. So for those of you who are already initiated, please use the chapters down below to skip to the parts that you want. So one way or another, you've come across this thing called Malifaux. Welcome. Maybe you've played Magic before. Maybe you were a board gamer before. Maybe you weren't really a tabletop gamer at all before, but you've become interested in this thing. What is it? We'll go through what Malifaux is first, the gameplay and the world, and then we'll go through why you might want to play it. If you're interested in more videos about Malifaux, we'll have a link to our playlist down below in the description. And if after this video you find that you do want to get started, we do have a great video about how to get started in Malifaux. We will also be referencing and linking to other channels as we go through this video. This whole community is here to support you getting into this game. So what is it? Malifaux is the miniature skirmish game set in the alternate history, low fantasy setting created by and published by Weird Games. Let's unpack that a little bit. First, what's a miniatures game? You might hear the terms war game or miniatures game, and those are pretty much interchangeable, but for the purposes of our video, we will be calling them miniatures games. Most miniatures games involve maneuvering a squad or army of models around a board area, often in PvP gameplay. Most miniatures games have a free movement system, as opposed to board games, which may have a gridded system or may just be able to travel between zones on a board. In Malifaux specifically, you can move your models in any direction on the board in inches, so a free movement system. Most miniatures games also have a way of simulating the environment or terrain features, and usually these have a mechanical impact to the gameplay. In Malifaux, terrain features can block line of sight, they can provide protection, they can impede movement. Most miniatures games also have a way of resolving in-game events with random chance, overwhelmingly so in most board games, tabletop RPG games, other miniatures games. Usually that method is by rolling dice. However, Malifaux eschews the dice for a deck of cards that's called the Fate deck. I'm a big fan of this mechanic. We do have a great video on why the Fate deck is a cool mechanic for games. You score points in Malifaux by completing objectives. It's actually possible for you to end the game with all your models are dead, but you still won on points. Lastly, Malifaux is a skirmish game. When you are talking to other people about miniatures games, it is very likely that the first thing that comes to mind is an army level game. These are games that simulate army level conflicts. So the types of models you're bringing, you might be bringing squads of 5 to 10 man units. You might be bringing tanks. The game is much bigger. Games like this are like Warhammer 40K, Age of Sigmar, Star Wars Legion. That's really common, but skirmish usually refers to a smaller game size. So in Malifaux, you are typically bringing between 7 to 15 models. Individual models, you're not bringing squads. In an army level game, 15 might just be the size of a single squad, but in Malifaux, 15 is a pretty big game. That's a big crew for you. And these crews are usually led by characters. In some army level games, you can play a whole game with very little impact from characters from the narrative of the game, but Malifaux is really a game that revolves around these characters. So that's kind of a summary of Malifaux as a game. Now, what about Malifaux as a world? So many games, many tabletop games usually have some type of backdrop or setting that really drives the flavor and the mechanics of the game. You know, Ticket to Ride, Settlers of Catan, Dungeons and Dragons. All these games have some type of world built around them. However, my experience is that with miniatures games, usually that goes a level deeper in terms of actually telling a bigger story and actually having characters that flush out that world. Now, why is that? I think it has to do with creating a sufficient backdrop for games within that setting to feel immersive and to provide a narrative justification for why a lot of these conflicts are happening. Especially in an army level game, you kind of want a narrative explanation for why these two forces have to resolve their conflict with violence. So let's get into this setting. Malifaux is set at the turn of the century. It is an alternate history where a portal, or a breach as it's called in the world of Malifaux, opened up in America, and on the other side is an alternate dimension, and Malifaux is the name of a city on that other side of that portal. Magic still exists in the world of Malifaux. Magic can be stored in soul stones, and soul stones are the resource that many of the factions within this world are competing for. So many of the conflicts within the setting pertain either directly or indirectly to the control of that resource. Malifaux is a very diverse setting that has 8 factions that each represent a different group of people trying to achieve their own ends within the world of Malifaux. Malifaux, Malifaux. Also Malifaux. The Guild is an oppressive governing force. The Arcanists are a ragtag group of magic users and union workers. The Resurrectionists are necromancers. The Bayou are a fun group of gremlins that live on the outskirts of Malifaux, the city. The Neverborn are the original inhabitants of Malifaux. The Ten Thunders are a crime syndicate. The Outcasts are your classic Old West criminal outlaw faction. And the Explorer Society are just a group of intrepid aristocrats just trying to have a little fun. Each faction in Malifaux has a diverse set of characters called master models, and if you want to know more about the factions and masters of Malifaux, I'll link some really great and useful videos in the description below. Time of recording, I highly recommend content from T&G Productions, the Danger Planet, and Defective Dice. So check it out, link in the description. And the best lore intro to Malifaux, in my opinion, is Defective Dice 1. So check that out after this for sure. So finally, why do you care? Why should you play Malifaux? Is it for you? Let's finally get into the meat of the video. First topic I have, why you should play price. We've talked about how Malifaux is a low model count game. You can get in and be happy for a long time with less than $100 into this game. If you're playing an army level game, $100 is 2 squads. That's not even a full game yet. On top of that, the game design is both broad and deep, so you could stay inside of this $100 investment, this sub-faction called Keywords in Malifaux that you've bought into for a long time, because of that game design buys you that replayability. Similar related topic is game size. So first, low model count, easier to store, 7 to 15 models. If you want to stay small, you can stay small. And the game size of a 3-foot by 3-foot play area, if you do not own a table that is of that size, you probably have access to one. And even if you have to play on the floor, I think 3-foot by 3-foot is a pretty reasonable size. So everything just gets smaller when you go down to a skirmish game, and I think that makes it really accessible. Next, great community. Malifaux has one of the greatest communities out of all the miniature games I have seen or played. I have listed a bunch of resources in the description below. Please check them out. Everyone just wants to help. Next, big topic, big draw for me to play Malifaux is the game design itself. This is about to be a doozy. If you're a competitive player, if you're a cerebral player, if you like being able to hone your skills, if you hate that moment where you carefully executed a strategy or a plan in a game and then your output randomness, your dice just completely blew all of your planning and execution out of the water, then Malifaux is for you. You can all but guarantee results if you play your cards right. Play on words. Malifaux is a game with a lot of input randomness, which we'll talk about in a different video, but that's dealing with situations that you've been dealt. There's so many points in the game where you have a lot of agency and control to make the best decision, and I think that's very rewarding gameplay. It's about resource management. Instead of just strictly relying on luck, it turns your RNG, your luck, into a bit of a resource. So you may not be able to control all events, but if you do a big resource spend, you might be able to guarantee one event. And that's really, really important. That could be the difference between winning or losing a game. That's also a really rewarding system. Again, we have a video about the Fate deck if you want to check it out. Link in the description. Malifaux is a really innovative game design, and from my experience, it has been ahead of the curve for most of its life. A lot of ideas that are gaining traction in miniature games now have been included in Malifaux from very early on, if not the beginning of its life. For example, alternating activations. People in the 40K world are talking about alternate activations all the time now. That's just been a part of Malifaux for the last decade or more. Objective play rather than just killing your opponent off the board. Again, 40K is only now finally adjusting to making objective play more important. But For the most part, you can play that game by just alpha striking your opponent off the board, and that's just not a fun gameplay experience. So objective play in Malifaux, very strong. And lastly, a regular errata cycle, not just for competitive players, but to just keep the game fresh. Every year, they refresh the objectives, for example. So that brings me to my next point about Malifaux is game balance. I believe Malifaux is a very balanced game. Generally speaking, in Malifaux, you can play almost anything you want. You don't have to play a model because it's too strong most of the time, and especially if you're casual, you can definitely play anything you want and have a good time. Let's talk a little bit about this. Let's unpack it. So other games, again, like 40K, they're mostly using points, their point system, to balance models. Is that unit too strong? Well, you make it more expensive. Or do we not see enough of this model? Okay, well, you make it cheaper, and then now people can bring more of them to a game. I think solely relying on this method of balancing the game is great for business, but I think people eventually experience some burnout. So what I think Malifaux does very well in regards to balance is it not only pulls the lever of points, but it also pulls the lever of rotating objectives. And it does that in two ways. The first way is that it has annual rotating objectives. They're called schemes. So every year, there are 13 of them. These schemes are either adjusted or swapped out. And what that does is it actually changes your win condition. So by changing the way you win the game, changing the way you score points, different sub-factions are going to be more powerful that year. So you can have the same models, and it's not like some of them are more expensive or less expensive. It's just that some models have better utility than others, given the updated scheme pool or objective pool. So I think that's a really cool way that they do balance, and they've been doing that since the beginning. The other way they use objectives is at the beginning of every game of Malifaux is done what's called encounter setup. So I told you there are 13 objectives or schemes possible, and at the beginning of every game, you pick 2. So that means every game is going to be completely different. So trying to measure what's overpowered when you have a rotating scheme pool annually and the games themselves have a rotating scheme pool makes it so that your success in Malifaux is determined by your practice. It's determined by your ability to play the game. The more you play the game, the better you get at it. But that only works for about so long before the objectives change again, and then you have to relearn how to win within these new sets of constraints. So I think that system for creating a balanced and fun gameplay, not to be overlooked, not to be underappreciated. And finally, the last reason, the world is unique and the models and characters look cool. I think Malifaux as a world is so unique that people have trouble describing it succinctly. People want to put it in a convenient little box. They want to say it's like a Western horror or a weird Western or but it's not that simple because it is super eclectic and diverse and has almost a flavor for everybody, but the art direction kind of ties it together and makes it all work together. So I think that's really cool. And it's not like any other game. And while it does have the common miniature game symptom of way too many references to other pop culture, I do think that it's a lot better than just another sci-fi game. So really, really unique. And the characters, super cool. If you dig even just a little, I'm sure that you will find a character for you. Which, speaking of characters, Malifaux has kind of been on what I would consider the forefront of representing diverse people since its inception. I will say that there are some things that did not age super well, and there's arguably a little bit of Orientalism going on, but things are always getting better. And they started from a better baseline to begin with. For example, at least half or more of the named master character models are women. And while a lot of those women have been portrayed what I would consider homogeneously, newer women characters are being portrayed with better diversity. For example, Maxine and Anya from the Explorer Society. So things are always getting better. So that was what is Malifaux and why you should play it. Malifaux is super cool. It's a reasonable size. That means both physical space and price. The game design is super innovative and ahead of the curve. The world is super awesome and it looks super cool. You've got a great community here supporting you. Welcome to Malifaux. Again, additional resources in the description below. We hope that this was very fun and informative for you. and we hope to see you in subsequent videos. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions, and we will dogpile that comment with as much usefulness as we can. This has been Deck at Corner Case. Please like and subscribe. We are always desperate. Join the Discord, join the Patreon if you would like to, and we'll see you next time.
Even in death, I still subscribe.